When you picture the life of a king or a queen, you probably think of palaces, luxury, and power. But what about the end of that life? Today, we're peeling back the curtain on some of the most brutal, bizarre, and just plain awful ways that history's most powerful rulers have died. And let me tell you, these are not fairy tale endings.
Right? It's so easy to imagine them passing away peacefully in some giant, opulent bed surrounded by their loyal court. But for so many of them, the reality was anything but dignified. In fact, for some, their royal status is exactly what made their final moments an absolute living hell.
You see, that crown, it wasn't a shield. It was more like a target. It made them vulnerable to public rage, to shadowy political plots, and to some of the most agonizing deaths you can imagine. So let's dive into our first category.
First up, we're looking at rulers whose deaths weren't just violent, they were public performances. These were spectacles of cruelty, designed to completely humiliate and destroy them in front of the entire world.
And our first example is the Byzantine Emperor Andronicos I. Now, this guy actually came to power with a lot of popular support. He wanted to reform a totally corrupt system. But his rule, well, it pretty quickly turned into a brutal reign of terror.
So Andronicus made some really powerful enemies by going after the rich and powerful. And when he suffered a huge military defeat, his rivals saw their chance. They whipped up the people of Constantinople into a frenzy, and the city completely turned on him. He was caught trying to escape and was handed right over to the furious mob.
And what happened next was just pure savagery. This wasn't a quick execution. This was a 3-day-long public spectacle of torture. He was paraded through the streets while the crowd mutilated him. Finally, they hung him upside down at the Hippodrome, where soldiers took turns stabbing him to death. Just a truly horrific end at the hands of his own people.
Next up, we have the Roman Emperor Valerian. Now, his story isn't about being torn apart by his own subjects, but about becoming a living trophy for a foreign enemy. He has the grim honor of being the first Roman emperor to ever be captured in battle.
So his army, which was already weakened by a plague, got crushed by the Sassanid Persians, and Valerian himself was taken prisoner. But his captor, King Sharper I, didn't just want a ransom. No, he wanted to humiliate Valerian. He reportedly used the former emperor as a human footstool, literally stepping on his back to get on his horse.
And his death, at least according to some accounts, was designed to be the ultimate insult. After Valerian tried to offer a ransom, Shapur allegedly had him executed by forcing him to drink molten gold. Then, his body was skinned, stuffed with straw, and put on display in a Persian temple as a permanent monument to Rome's defeat.
So these two deaths really show you two sides of the same coin. Both were these horrible public spectacles, right? But one, Andronicos, was a victim of rage from within, destroyed by his own subjects. The other, Valerian, was a victim of conquest from the outside. His humiliation was a political power move by a rival king.
But the threat wasn't always an angry mob or a foreign army. Sometimes, the deadliest danger came from the very people a ruler was supposed to trust the most. So our next section is all about the poison, plots, and paranoia happening inside the palace walls.
And who better to start with than the Roman Emperor Commodus? This guy was known for his just extreme narcissism. He thought of himself as a living god, and he even fought as a gladiator in the Colosseum. But eventually, his ego and his cruelty turned his own inner circle against him.
I mean, Commodus basically signed his own death warrant. He literally drew up a list of people he was planning to execute, and on that list were his own mistress and his top officials. Well, when they found the list, they knew it was either him or them. So his mistress Marcia tried to poison him first, but he threw it all up. That meant it was time for Plan B. They sent his personal wrestling partner in to finish the job and strangle him in his bath.
Okay, from ancient Rome, let's jump forward to 16th century Britain and the tragic story of Mary, Queen of Scots. After being forced off her own throne in Scotland, she fled to England, hoping for protection from her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. But instead of a safe haven, she basically found a prison, and she became the center of Catholic plots to overthrow Elizabeth.
So after Mary was found guilty of treason for plotting against Elizabeth, she was sentenced to be beheaded. But her execution was famously gruesomely botched. The executioner was either nervous or just terrible at his job. The first swing of the axe hit the back of her head. The second one almost did it, but not quite. He actually had to hack at her neck to finally finish the job. Just a horrifying, undignified end for a queen.
All right, for our final section, we're moving away from assassinations and public executions to something that might be even more terrifying. Just sheer bad luck and the absolute horrors of old-timey medicine. This is all about the prolonged agony of the end.
First, let's meet Charles II of Navarre, a 14th century king who was so unpleasant, they actually nicknamed him the Bad. In his old age, he got sick with an illness that left him paralyzed, so his doctors prescribed a truly bizarre treatment.
So get this. The doctor's big idea, their cure, was to have the king sewn into linen sheets that had been soaked in brandy. One night, an attendant needed to cut a loose thread, and instead of grabbing scissors, she used a candle to burn it off. The alcohol-soaked sheets instantly went up in flames, and because he was paralyzed and wrapped up, the king was burned alive by his own medicine.
Our final story is about another Charles II, but this time, the King of England. In 1685, he suddenly collapsed from what we now think was probably a stroke. For the next 4 days, his royal doctors unleashed the full, terrifying force of 17th century medical wisdom on him.
Instead of helping, his doctors basically tortured him to death. They drained so much blood from him that he was left faint and weak. They forced him to purge and vomit until he was severely dehydrated. They burned his skin with chemicals to create blisters, and they even fed him actual poisons like mercury. His last days were just a non-stop nightmare of pain, all inflicted by the very people who were trying to save him.
So after hearing all these grim stories of public torture, private betrayal, and just agonizing accidents, you start to see a darker side of what it means to be in power. What are the lessons here?
Well, it's pretty clear that a crown offers no real safety. In fact, it often just invites danger. These stories show us that in the halls of power, trust is incredibly rare and easily replaced by paranoia. And maybe most of all, they prove that no amount of authority can protect you from a freak accident or the ignorance of the times. In their final most important moments, these all-powerful rulers were completely and utterly powerless.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? We so often focus on the glory and the privilege that comes with wearing a crown. But when you look at these horrifying deaths, it forces you to think about the immense risks, the isolation, and the brutal fragility that define so many of these royal lives. It really begs the question, what is the true price of ultimate power?